For University of Illinois Extension, I'm Todd Gleason. We're joined by Aaron Hager, weed scientist from the U of I. Earlier this year, those farmers that are no-tillers made note across not only Illinois, but a good part of the Midwest, that they were having some problems with particular weed, not water hemp. This time around. It was mare's tail. They've been trying to treat it, probably to no avail. When they get out to harvest this fall, they will find it again. What should they be thinking about for fall control, if anything at all?
Well, really the first thing to consider with mare's tail is just simply based on the number of populations that we found across virtually the southern two-thirds of the state of Illinois. Those plants that were not controlled at any point in time during the 2013 growing season likely made an abundant amount of seed. Mare's tail is a plant species that's known to produce anywhere from 200,000 or more seeds per plant. And these seeds readily move from field to field because they actually have structures on the seeds that are adapted to wind movement. So it's really, if you have mare's tail population in any one particular field, chances are if those plants are able to make seed, those seeds are now going to be moving either within that field or even out of that field to infest other parts of the geography or fields that maybe perhaps had never seen mare's tail before. So taking into consideration how these plants grow, reproduce, and the seeds move, we really encourage farmers and others in the weed control industry to take a very good look at some of these fields as they come out of harvest this fall. And if we begin to see populations of mare's tail plants that have emerged in these fields, we do recommend that farmers begin to treat these fields this fall.
How do they do that?
Mare's tail is a plant species. It's generally in most portions of central and northern Illinois, it behaves more as a winter annual, which means that the seeds are going to be germinating this fall and the plants will emerge anytime from now until about the end of November. And so these are the plants that typically would grow to a what's called a rosette stage. And in this stage, which rosette is typically just basically a cluster of leaves, this is the overwintering stage of mare's tail. And this is the stage that will begin growing again the following spring. Many times it's those mare's tail plants that have overwintered that tend to be the most difficult to control with spring burn down herbicides before planting soybeans. So taking all this into consideration, fall is a very good time to try to work on mare's tail simply because the plants are very small and we have a lot of herbicide options that we could recommend to use to control the mare's tail that we generally would be less inclined to recommend in the spring before planting soybean.
Okay, so no-tillers are not going to want to turn it under, which I assume is one option, mechanical. For the no-tillers or those who want to do the herbicide route, what kinds of things can they spray?
Generally in the fall of the year, a couple things to keep in mind. Number one, of course, is do you want a herbicide that has residual activity or do you want to go with a treatment that really does not have much substantial activity in the soil? For those people who may want to use something that's less expensive, that does not include a residual herbicide, timing of that application becomes very, very important. We don't want to apply these types of materials too soon in the fall. We want to make sure that we have enough time for most of that seed to actually germinate and those plants emerge through the crop residue before we make that application of non-residual herbicides. Things, for example, like 2,4-D can be very, very effective on mare's tail when applied at about a 1 pound acid per acre rate in the fall. Now, if you had a formulation of 2,4-D that had about 3.8 pounds of acid per gallon, that would equate to a 1 quart rate, application rate of the product. If there are people who want to use programs that have more soil residual activity, the timing of the application becomes a bit less important, but we still encourage those applications to include something in there to control any plants that have already emerged, again, such as something like either 2,4-D or dicamba is another very effective fall applied herbicide for mare's tail.
When we get to next spring, are there problems they'll have to deal with again?
The best recommendation that we can have is never plant soybean, especially into fields that have any existing mare's tail. We simply want to control all those mare's tail plants before we plant into that. And the reason for that is because our suspicion is that many of these mare's tail that we dealt with in 2013, once they were treated with the burn down that included glyphosate, many of these plants demonstrated recovery symptoms, differential growth characteristics that are fairly common of glyphosate-resistant mare's tail. If you couple that with the anecdotal observation that in many of these no-till fields where mare's tail survived the burn down that had glyphosate in it, we really did not see many other winter annual species that survived that burn down. Again, suggesting that much of this mare's tail may actually be glyphosate resistant. So, of course, one thing, of course, that means is that we simply cannot rely exclusively on glyphosate either in the fall or the spring to burn off or control any emerged mare's tail. We have to be very, very aggressive with the types of programs that we use in the spring, simply because if we miss the mare's tail in the burn down, if we plant soybean into it, we really don't have many effective options to try to control the mare's tail once the soybean have actually emerged in the field. And mare's tail is a competitive species that has been shown to be able to reduce soybean yield when the two of them are grown together.
Other items now that we need to consider for fall control.
Fall control really comes down again to the timing with the residuals or with not. One of the most effective things that we encourage a lot of people to consider would be to run a fall program regardless of if you want to add residuals or not, with a rate of 2,4-D at that 1 quart or 1 pound of acid rate. Again, it's very effective. We don't have to worry too much about plant back intervals in front of soybean. And the mare's tail in the fall of the year will always be easier to control than those plants that overwinter, resume growth in the spring of the year, and then we try to control plants that now, instead of being simply at a small rosette stage, may be anywhere from 4 to 6 to 8 inches tall. Those can be very, very difficult and usually control with herbicides on larger mare's tail can be fairly inconsistent. If we don't want to run a herbicide program, again, one of the very effective ways to control mare's tail in the spring of the year before we plant is with some type of pre-plant tillage operation.
Thanks, Aaron. Aaron Hager, weed scientist from the University of Illinois. I'm U of I Extension's Todd Gleason.